Before you scroll, let me ask you something. What would you do if your entire company tried to erase you and Christmas exposed every secret they buried? This isn't just office drama. This is betrayal, receipts, and revenge, served ice cold. Let me show you how one woman flipped the whole system upside down. My name is Layla. I'm 34 years old, and this is how I turned their betrayal into my blueprint for power. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. The Christmas party started like it always did, cheap wine breathing its sour sweetness into the air, stale cookies cracking like old drywall between too many forced smiles. We were on the 6th floor of that bland office building outside St. Paul, the kind of place where the windows never fully opened and the heating clicked randomly like it had a nervous twitch. The fluorescent lights hummed above us, a restless insect-like drone that never let you forget you were still at work, even when corporate insisted it was a celebration. Someone had strung fairy lights around the cubicles, but half of them flickered like they were protesting the idea of joy. And right there next to the printer sat the Advent calendar. This soft felt thing, faded around the edges, each little pocket stitched with uneven numbers. You could tell it had been bought in a rush at a craft fair or maybe pulled from a clearance bin after last year's sales ended. Each pocket stuffed with a joke or a plastic trinket meant to distract us from the fact that our holiday bonus was being served as supermarket cookies. They always acted like this calendar was some beloved tradition, but this year it felt more like a countdown clock. Because I wasn't looking at the calendar, I was looking at them, the smiles that didn't reach eyes, the huddled whispers leaning too close, the way certain conversations stopped when I passed. They thought they'd hidden it all, tucked it neatly behind corporate policy and fake holiday cheer. But the thing about betrayal is that once you sense it, you start noticing all the tiny fractures in the facade. It had started small. My bonus never hit my account, not even the pending notification. Then, that strange moment when an email loaded halfway before disappearing entirely, like the system swallowed it alive. I stared at the empty inbox for a full minute, wondering if I'd imagined it, but I didn't imagine the conversation I overheard 2 nights later. I had stayed late, as usual, filing Q4 reports while most people were already home watching TV or wrapping presents. The walls carried voices too well in that place. Their tones slipped through the seams, drifting to me. Boss saying, "Just delete it. If HR finds it, we're done." Assistant manager replying, "She won't notice. She's too distracted lately." Too distracted. As if caring about the job, caring about people made me weak. As if the hours I put in made me blind. I remember sitting there, back straight, fingers frozen on the keyboard, realizing they weren't just discussing paperwork. They were talking about me, about removing something that mattered. And they were confident I'd never catch it. I didn't confront them. I didn't storm into an office demanding answers. I just listened. Then I waited. Waiting, when done right, is a kind of power. Tonight was December 22nd. The smell of cinnamon potpourri mixed with the sharp bite of floor cleaner, fighting for dominance. Someone had scattered fake pine needles around the drinks table, and every step produced a soft crunch. Music thumped from a small Bluetooth speaker someone had set under a stack of files, making the bass vibrate through the metal desk legs. Coworker shouting, "Open the next one." Her voice too bright, like she was trying to pull everyone back into some hollow sense of togetherness. I stepped forward, slow and steady, letting my hand settle on the felt pouch marked 22. I wasn't in a rush. My fingertips brushed the stitching, and for a moment the room felt unreasonably still, like the air was waiting with me. I turned my head slightly, not enough to make a scene, just enough to confirm what I already knew. The assistant manager stood stiff, jaw tight, eyes darting between me and the printer. And behind her, our regional supervisor watched with his arms crossed in that way he used when he was pretending to be calm. They knew something was about to happen. They just didn't know how much. I opened the envelope, and exactly then, the printer beside me woke up with a sudden whir, as if it had been holding its breath. The sound sliced through the music. Every head turned. One page slid out, then another, then a third. The intern, who always tried too hard to be helpful, grabbed the first page with a smile that faltered before the ink even dried on her expression. "Is this a joke?" she asked. The room froze. Someone turned off the music without a word. The intern held up the page, and even from across the room I could see the subject line. "Delete this before HR sees it." There was a pause, a dense silence where people's eyes skittered over one another, waiting for someone to explain. But no one spoke. More pages emerged. Expense reports with mismatched numbers, private threads dripping with arrogance, unkind jokes about a colleague's stutter, typed casually as if cruelty were harmless when hidden in pixels. A spreadsheet comparing salaries, my name conveniently erased, and then the emails, the ones that said everything. Manager 1, if Layla ever asks about her bonus, just say it was a corporate freeze. Manager 2, lol, she won't. She still thinks we're mentoring her. That laugh, that tiny lol, it landed heavier than a shove. It told me exactly what they thought of me and how certain they were they'd get away with it. I didn't move at first. I let the printer run until it had nothing more to give. Then I picked up the pages one by one. They were warm, almost comforting against my palms, but the words cut sharp. Each sheet felt heavier than the last, like I was holding their entire scheme in my hands. My breathing stayed slow, but something hot unfurled in my chest. Not rage, not sadness, something cleaner, something sharper. Truth, maybe. I turned around, and in a voice quiet enough to make everyone lean closer, I said, "Looks like the advent calendar came with a confession." HR snapped up from her chair so fast it screeched against the floor. The managers went pale. The assistant manager tried to form words, but only fragments came out. "This isn't yours?" I asked. "Because your name's on everyone." I kept my tone soft because softness can be a blade. The silence around us deepened until it felt like the whole floor was listening. They tried to laugh at first, that uncomfortable, brittle kind of laugh people use when they think they can still salvage the moment. But no one joined them, not this time. Because the truth wasn't hidden anymore. It was in bold font, sliding off warm paper. They had written their own downfall. All I did was open a pocket on a felt calendar, and the system, with all its flaws and all its quiet tracks, did the rest. After the last page slid out of the printer tray, no one moved. Not the interns clinging to their cider glasses, not the marketing team frozen mid-laugh, not even the DJ who had been hired to bring energy to the room. He stood there holding his phone, thumb hovering over the play button, as if touching it might detonate something. The fairy lights blinked around us in uneven pulses, casting soft shadows on faces I used to trust. Faces that looked different now, stripped of pretense, stripped of excuses. Just people caught in the act of pretending they were better than they were. HR finally spoke. "Layla, could you step aside with me for a moment?" Her voice trembled at the edges, like she was trying to make it sound professional and failing. I met her eyes, steady, and didn't move, not an inch. "Did you know?" I asked. She blinked. Her lips parted, then closed, like the truth got stuck somewhere behind her teeth. "No?" I said, "or you don't want to answer in front of witnesses." The word witnesses hit her harder than anything else could have. It wasn't a threat. It was just fact. And facts were suddenly dangerous in that room. She flinched, her shoulders recoiling as though something invisible had snapped against her. That was enough to tell me everything. Behind her, the managers whose names were all over those printed emails had collapsed into frantic whispering. Not strategic whispering, not confident whispering. The kind that comes from people who suddenly realize they've been walking on a frozen lake that was thinner than they thought. Their eyes kept darting toward the hallway like salvation might be waiting there. Maybe they imagined slipping, out unnoticed. Maybe they still believed they could outrun this. But this moment had already happened. It had started the moment they decided my loyalty made me weak. The moment they assumed my silence meant I wasn't paying attention. It had been real since the day they chose deceit over integrity and thought I wouldn't notice the difference. 2 weeks earlier, I was still hoping for a promotion. I can't forget that version of myself. The version who believed in merit. The version who believed that long hours and consistent results still meant something in the real world. I'd been working 12-hour days through most of Q4, coming in early while the sky was still bruised with morning haze and staying past sunset until the building hummed like a sleeping animal. I even stayed Thanksgiving weekend to finalize compliance summaries. My family kept calling from Atlanta, asking why I didn't fly out, why I didn't take a break. Mom had said, "You work too hard, baby," and I'd smiled into the phone, telling her, just one more year. One more push. One more push toward something I thought was waiting for me. Recognition. Stability. Respect. I actually believed hard work carved a path forward. I believed loyalty meant something. But then I found the draft folder. It was there for a heartbeat, a flicker, some glitch in the sync that revealed a message I wasn't meant to see. Subject line, Layla's raise. Discussion points. It felt like cold water soaked through my clothes in an instant as I read the bullet points that followed. Good optics to say we're mentoring her, but she's not essential. No client-facing work, war, lower bonus. She's too passive to challenge us anyway. That word, passive. It echoed inside my skull for days. Not because it was insulting. Insults don't break you. It was the certainty beneath it, the way they had weighed me, measured me, and decided I wouldn't fight back. Like I was some quiet decoration in the background of their professional lives. Something safe to underestimate. Something predictable. Like wallpaper. Always there, never noticed. That was when something shifted in me. Not anger. Something steadier. Something quieter. A line drawn in my mind. I realized I didn't need confrontation. I needed preparation. So I kept screenshots. Every draft. Every timestamp. Every tiny slip they thought would disappear into digital static. Then I watched. I watched how people printed confidential files. They always used the shared printer on the third floor because it synced faster. They believed clearing the queue meant clearing the trail, but they didn't know how often the system held on to fragments. They didn't know how often the machines remembered what they tried to erase. That's when I noticed his name. Colin. He was the one who had synced his email to the office printer weeks earlier, said his laptop was glitching and he needed a workaround. Everyone nodded along. No one questioned it, but he forgot to unsync, forgot to disconnect. And I remembered it. So I waited. I crafted a QR code that looked harmless, just a link to a holiday message from leadership, something festive, something corporate approved, a simple tool for our team advent calendar. But when scanned, it triggered a command buried beneath the visual, a quiet instruction that told the printer to release any queued files from the last 7 days tied to the synced email. His mistake created the crack. I just widened it with red and green ribbon. Tonight, after the final page printed and the truth lay exposed in stark, undeniable ink, I read the last lines softly. Then, I placed the stack of papers on the drinks table like ornaments no one wanted to touch. They curled slightly at the edges as they cooled. HR opened her mouth again, trying to stitch authority back into her voice. "This needs to be handled in private. So you can handle it the way you've handled everything else?" I asked. I looked around the room. Really looked. At the interns who had put in unpaid overtime because they were told it would look good on evaluations, at the payroll woman who had been quietly excluded from meetings after her maternity leave, at the custodian who had repaired the thermostat with his own tools last month because maintenance forgot his request for the 3rd time. They all froze now, holding their breath with me. "How many of you have been told you're lucky to be here?" I asked. No one answered. They didn't need to. The truth flickered in their eyes with the fairy lights. Recognition, shared exhaustion, shared shame, shared anger. HR tried again. "Layla, if you have a complaint—" "No," I said. "I have evidence." I reached into my purse and pulled out the envelope I had kept sealed for weeks. Inside was my original bonus approval, signed and time-stamped, and the retracted version, falsified 3 days later. 2 copies, 1 file number, county notarized. Their cover-up wasn't just unethical. It was a crime documented in duplicate. I saw the shift in Colin's expression, that crack in the arrogance. His face tightened, a flicker of panic tearing through his composure as he stepped forward too fast. "Let's just talk this out, Layla. No need to make a scene." "The printer made the scene," I said. "You wrote the script." He reached for the papers, desperate, but I stepped back. His hand froze in the space between us. For the first time, I wasn't scared of him. I wasn't intimidated by hierarchy, by titles, by people who believed proximity to authority made them untouchable. Let them see, I thought. Let them all see. Because I wasn't alone anymore. Across the room, Julia, the girl from compliance, straightened. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She just nodded once. A small, precise motion. The kind you make when a truth you've known quietly is finally allowed out into the open. She had seen it too. Julia didn't say a word. She just met my eyes and gave the smallest nod, a quiet acknowledgement that slipped through the chaos like a lifeline. It was subtle, barely more than emotion, but something in me steadied when I saw it. Something inside that had been rattling, trembling beneath the surface without me even realizing it. That nod told me I wasn't the only one who had been awake while everyone else tried to sleepwalk through the truth. It told me she had seen the cracks too, and for the first time that night, I didn't feel like I was standing on a cliff alone. HR looked like she had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Her eyes kept darting from the pile of printed emails to the ring of employees still hovering near the folding tables stacked with wilted cookies and half-empty cups. They didn't know whether they were supposed to leave. They didn't know if leaving would make them complicit or cowardly. You could feel the tension in their bodies, a kind of collective stillness, as though they were waiting for someone to tell them the rules again. The party was over. Everyone knew it. The music was dead. The laughter had evaporated. Even the cheap decorations drooped against the cubicles as if embarrassed to be part of the scene. But the reckoning, the real moment that mattered, that was just beginning to unfurl. The manager stepped forward with that strained managerial smile he used whenever he was trying to look in control. "Layla, we should speak privately. Maybe step into my office." His voice shook around the word office, like suddenly the room he spent half his life in had turned into a crime scene. I tilted my head just slightly. "You mean the office where you signed off on my raise, then deleted the file from the server 3 days later?" He blinked. One slow, heavy blink, the kind a man gives when he realizes he can't pretend the truth away anymore. I watched the realization sink into him, watched his posture falter for a fraction of a second. Colin stepped in, trying to salvage authority the way someone in a sinking boat tries to patch holes with their bare hands. "Okay, fine. You've made your point, but you printing private correspondence is a violation. If anything, you've exposed yourself here." The audacity would have been almost impressive if it wasn't so predictable. But before I could speak, Julia did. She stepped forward, spine straight, her voice calm in a way that silenced every stray whisper. That email account was synced to a shared device. Technically, anything that comes out of a company printer is public domain if it isn't marked confidential. There was no sharpness in her tone, no bravado, just clarity. Clean, precise truth, delivered by someone who knew the weight of each word. The legal bite in her sentence sliced right through Colin's attempt to regain ground. His face ignited in red. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The humiliation was sudden, vivid. "Thank you, Julia," I said. And I meant it, deeply. Around us, the room felt like a held breath. People stared at the floor, at their cups, at their hands. Phones were out, but pointed downward, screens dark, not recording. Not because they weren't tempted. Everyone wanted to remember this moment, but because something about what was happening didn't feel like entertainment. It felt solemn, heavy, a kind of collective unveiling. The DJ, who had tried earlier to pump energy into a room already going stale, quietly turned off his speaker. He wrapped the cord around his equipment with slow, deliberate motions, like each loop gave him permission to escape the tension. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't need to. The fairy lights blinked softly, their rhythm uneven, like they couldn't decide whether to celebrate or surrender. The air had changed. Even the temperature felt different, colder near the walls, warmer near the cluster of truth exposed on the table. I turned back to HR. "You wanted to speak privately," I said. "Fine, but I'm recording it, and I want a union rep present." Her voice thinned to a whisper. "Layla, we don't have a union." "Not yet," I said. Those two words made her inhale sharply. It wasn't a threat. It was a possibility. One she knew the company wouldn't survive intact. I left the printed pages exactly where they rested, on the drinks table beside the untouched stack of white elephant gifts. Office trinkets no one suddenly had the appetite to unwrap. The cheap tablecloth beneath the pages wrinkled slightly at the edges, as though bracing itself for the weight of what lay on top. Let it sit there. Let it stain with truth. We walked toward the conference room, the three of them trailing behind me like shadows scrambling to keep up. The hallway seemed longer than usual, every footstep echoing with things left unsaid. The glass walls reflected our silhouettes, mine steady, theirs fragmented. When we entered the room, the overhead lights flickered once before settling into a steady glow, as if even the building needed a moment to process what was happening. It was me, HR, Colin, and Mark. The manager who once told me in front of the whole team that I needed to speak up more if I wanted to lead. Now he sat in silence, staring at the patterned carpet as if it could save him. HR tried to anchor herself in professionalism. Her voice came out soft, fragile at the edges. "Layla, if you have evidence of wrongdoing, we're prepared to open an investigation." I shook my head. "I don't want an investigation." She paused. The word hung between us, confusing her. Then she asked, quieter, "What do you want?" "A resignation," I said. The silence that followed was thick, coiling, almost warm in its intensity. For a second, no one breathed. Then Colin laughed. It was a jagged sound, collapsing halfway as though even he didn't believe in it. "You really think, after one stunt, you can dictate terms?" I leaned forward, feeling something cold and calm slide into place inside me. Stunt. That was what he thought this was. A performance. A moment I'd get over. I clasped my hands together slowly. "You falsified internal compensation files. You conspired to bury my bonus. You instructed someone to delete documentation that affects my career trajectory. And you joked about it in writing." I slid the notarized copy of my original bonus approval across the table. The paper made a soft sound as it moved, like a blade whispering against a sheath. "That's called fraud," I said. "I don't need to dictate terms. I just need to send this to the labor board and let them do the talking." Mark's face went pale. His hand drifted to his collar as though the air had turned too thick to breathe. "Please, Layla," HR whispered. "This is a sensitive matter. Not anymore." I lifted my phone, tapped play. The recording filled the room. Colin's voice, 2 weeks old, echoing with sharp clarity. "Just delete it. If HR finds it, we're done." His own words betrayed him. I looked directly at him as the last syllable echoed into silence. "Your office door was cracked," I said. "Maybe next time. Close it before committing a crime." His jaw tightened so hard I could see the muscle jump. His eyes darted to HR, to Mark, to me, desperate for an exit that didn't exist anymore. The panic rose from him like heat, a visible wave of dread. I didn't need to say more. They knew. They all knew. They didn't just underestimate me. They erased me. They took my silence and twisted it into approval. They mistook loyalty for servitude. They thought I would keep my head down forever. But they forgot something. I pay attention. Colin didn't speak again. Not for the rest of the meeting. He sat there like a man watching his own house burn down, quiet and unmoving, staring at the table as though if he didn't blink, the flames wouldn't spread. But the truth was already climbing the walls around him. The smoke had already seeped into every corner. Everything worth protecting was already ash, even if he pretended not to see it yet. Mark tried to step into the silence, smoothing down his tie with that nervous habit he had whenever he felt control slipping just beyond his reach. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, like he was about to deliver a heartfelt speech. Instead, it came out hollow, recycled, the same tone he used whenever he wanted to avoid responsibility. Layla, I think we all know tensions have been high lately. Mistakes happen in fast-moving environments. The important thing is, we move forward. I tilted my head slowly, letting the weight of his words sit between us. Forward. As though the direction mattered when no one was willing to acknowledge the mess behind us. Forward, I repeated, without accountability? He gave a weak smile, that thin smirk he wore during every performance review, the one meant to convey wisdom even when he had none. He nodded like he was offering a gift. Look, I'm willing to personally revisit your compensation package for Q1. You mean restore what you stole? His mouth twitched, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. He didn't like that word. Stole. It was too sharp, too honest, too unpolished for the corporate vocabulary he preferred. But I didn't soften it. Not for them, not anymore. I had spent years choosing gentler phrasing to keep the peace. Tonight, peace had already burned. HR cleared her throat softly, though there was nothing soft left in her expression. She was rattled. Truly rattled. The kind of rattling that happens when someone realizes they've trusted the wrong people for too long. Given the seriousness of the documents printed, she said carefully, we'll need to take immediate action. Temporarily, we'll place Colin and Mark on investigatory leave. Not good enough. I stood before she could finish. My chair scraped back against the floor, the sound sharp in the tense room. I felt the eyes of every person land on me, but they didn't overwhelm me. They clarified something in me. They steadied the ground I was standing on. You knew, I said, or you chose not to know. Either way, the culture here isn't broken. It was built this way. No one argued. No one even tried. They didn't stop me when I walked out of the conference room. They couldn't, because everything I said was true, and they knew it. The truth was its own momentum, pushing me forward with a force I didn't have to generate myself. The halls outside were nearly empty now, only the faint echo of footsteps from employees leaving in clumsy, quiet pairs. The party had evaporated like it had never existed. The smell of cinnamon and cheap wine still clung to the air, but the warmth was gone. People didn't say goodbye. They didn't meet my eyes. They walked with their coats half-buttoned, their faces pale, as though they were stepping out of a dream they weren't sure how to describe. Julia caught up to me near the elevators. She moved lightly, almost hesitantly, as though approaching someone standing too close to the edge of something high. When she stopped beside me, she didn't rush into words. You okay? She asked. Not yet, I said, but I will be. She nodded, her gaze dropping for a moment before she lifted it again. You know? I've been collecting things too. Screenshots, memos, things I thought didn't matter. They matter, I said. Her shoulders loosened just slightly. She reached into the inside pocket of her coat and pulled out a small thumb drive, silver and worn, the edges scratched as though she'd been holding it for months. She placed it in my hand without flourish. If you're building something, you don't have to do it alone, she said. For a moment my throat tightened. That was the first time anyone had said that to me in months, maybe longer. Working in places like ours had a way of shrinking you into someone who solved everything alone, survived everything alone, carried everything alone. I closed my hand around the drive. Thank you, I said, and the words felt heavier than I expected. She smiled, but it stopped short in her eyes. I wish I'd spoken up sooner, she whispered. You just did. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was afraid, but because for the first time in a long time, something felt clear. There was no path forward with them. There never had been, but there was a path forward for me. The next day, I called a labor attorney, a calm woman with a steady voice who didn't gasp or hesitate when I told her what happened. She listened, really listened, asked questions in a way that made me feel like the facts mattered again. The day after that, I filed an official complaint with the Minnesota Department of Labor and Industry. I included everything, every piece of documentation, the emails, the printed pages, the recording from the cracked office door, the notarized form, and Julia's drive. It wasn't about revenge anymore. Revenge is reactive, fueled by anger alone. This was about record, about proof, about putting the truth somewhere it couldn't be buried again, somewhere their hands couldn't reach. A week later, I received an email from the company, a settlement offer, quiet money, no apology, just a check and a non-disclosure agreement, silence packaged as a solution. I declined. Silence is how they win, and I wasn't interested in helping them win anymore. That afternoon, I posted the entire story on LinkedIn, facts only. No names, just dates and timelines and quotations and documents. Enough detail for anyone in the industry to understand exactly what had happened without needing me to spell out the villains. I didn't accuse. I didn't rant. I laid out the truth like bricks. People paid attention. Within a month, Colin was out. Mark, too. HR was restructured, a sanitized phrase meaning quietly removed. The company released a public statement about rethinking leadership culture. It was vague, polished, and full of buzzwords, but everyone knew what it really meant. And me? I was already gone. Long gone. Not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. I had walked out of that building before they ever knew what they'd lost. 3 offers were waiting in my inbox before the quarter closed. One from a firm in Chicago, promising growth. One from a nonprofit in Seattle, promising impact. And one, my favorite, from a women-led startup in Austin. Their message was short. No fluff, no corporate tone. We believe you. Sometimes 5 words can rebuild a person. I chose the startup in Austin. The decision came to me slowly at first, like a small light glowing in the corner of a dark room, then all at once with a certainty that settled deep in my chest. Not just because of the offer, though it was generous in ways that made me stop and reread the email twice. Not just because they seemed excited to have me, it was the way they responded to my story. The way they didn't treat it like baggage or drama or something they'd have to manage around. They treated it like data, like experience earned, like truth forged under pressure rather than something to be ashamed of. Their founder didn't ask if I was over it. She didn't ask if I'd healed or moved on or processed my feelings into something more palatable for an onboarding interview. She asked what I'd learned, what I'd do differently next time, what I planned to build next. Her voice on the call was steady and warm, like she was inviting me into a conversation with someone who understood what the world could take from a woman if she wasn't paying attention. That mattered to me in a way I didn't even fully admit until the offer letter was already in my inbox. My last day at the old office came quietly. No dramatic exit, no scene designed for poetic closure. I walked in, scanned my badge for the last time, and listened to the soft beep that had once made me feel like I belonged. It didn't sound like belonging anymore. Just a sound, just a door unlocking. I didn't clear out my desk with triumphant flair. I didn't want a grand moment. I didn't need one. I sorted through the folders, the pens, the worn-out sticky notes with half-finished reminders. I threw away the dried-up markers and kept the one pen that still wrote smoothly, mostly out of habit. Then I left a note taped to the inside drawer. Not for any one person in particular. Not for the managers or HR or even Colin, though I knew they'd all eventually hear about it. It was for whoever came next. Whoever sat in that chair and gave their energy to a company that might not deserve it. A small note written neatly on a plain white card. Don't confuse silence with submission. It felt right to tuck it out of sight, like a whisper waiting to be discovered at the right moment. Not a warning, a reminder. A few weeks later, the same intern who had picked up the first printed email, the one whose smile had dissolved as she read the subject line aloud, sent me a message on Facebook. The notification popped up late in the evening while I was unpacking boxes in my new apartment, the one with sunlit windows and a view of the Austin skyline that made me feel like possibility was a living thing. Her message was short. I saw what you did. I want to be like that someday. I sat there for a long moment, thumb hovering above the keyboard, feeling something warm and almost fragile unfurl inside me. That girl had stood in the middle of a room full of lies and refused to laugh along. She hadn't joined the whispers. She hadn't turned away in confusion. She had held the truth in her hands before anyone had words for it. "You already are," I wrote back. "Strength doesn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it's just refusing to participate in cruelty. Sometimes it's standing still when the people around you are pretending not to see what's right in front of them." She had done that without knowing anyone noticed. I think about that night, sometimes. The smell of cinnamon and printer ink weaving through the stale air of that sixth-floor room. The odd combination of holiday decorations and office exhaustion. The fake pine needles crunching softly under my boots as I walked toward the Advent calendar, not knowing exactly how the moment would unfold, but knowing something had already shifted beyond repair. It's strange how memory works, how certain details stay sharp while others fade into a kind of emotional haze. I remember the color of the fairy lights reflecting off the glossy printer tray. I remember the silence when the music stopped. I remember the weight of the warm pages in my hands and the way the room seemed to inhale all at once when the truth laid itself bare. But what I remember most is the stillness, that moment where the noise died, where the pretense fell away, and truth stood on its own legs for the first time in too long. A kind of quiet that wasn't emptiness, but revelation. A quiet that didn't ask for approval or applause. It just existed, undeniable and final. For the first time in my career, I stopped waiting for permission to matter. I stopped asking for the recognition they kept promising, but never delivering. I stopped hoping effort would magically transform into fairness. They hid their secrets in emails, buried in drafts, tucked between jokes and directives, protected by the belief that no one was paying attention. So, Christmas printed the truth. There's something poetic about that. How the holiday they used as a shield, an excuse for cheap kindness and cheaper wine, became the moment their entire system cracked open. My revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't fire and fury. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't storm an office or flip a desk. It was stillness. It was patience. It was letting their own words rise to the surface like something buoyant and impossible to drown, undeniable, final, quiet in a way that echoes louder than shouting ever could. They thought I was too quiet to fight back, too agreeable, too passive, too easy to overlook. They mistook my silence for approval, for fear, for obedience. But silence isn't emptiness. Silence is space. Silence is observation. Silence is a ledger where the truth writes itself in ink deeper than their lies. And in the end, silence is exactly what exposed them. Now, when I walk into my new office, there's a corkboard by the front desk, bright, filled with color, pinned with photos from team hikes and birthday lunches and project milestones. It doesn't try to hide anything. It doesn't pretend to be more than it is. There's no advent calendar, no envelopes, no tricks disguised as tradition. Just people gathering around something that feels real. At the top of the board, held by a single red pushpin, is a quote on a piece of paper cut in uneven edges, like someone tore it from a notebook in a rush of inspiration. "She stole my story. I rewrote the ending. The first time I saw it, I stood there longer than I meant to. Not because it made me proud, but because it made me certain. Certain that everything I lost in that old building had made room for something better, something true, something I chose. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments.